Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome to part 2, guide to specification and exam questions advice for Sociology G672 OCR AS level exam. Sociology of the family. Looking at the second section, as I said before, the 4 sections. You use evidence from the different sections that you've learned for each section. So you can understand how they connect together. Here's some advice on the role of the family in society. So basically, you've got you've got 2 main views here. You've got the structure view. So the structuralists are influenced by the idea that there are key structures, social structures, which shape human behaviour. This is known as a top-down approach to the explanation of behaviour. So society shapes behaviour of the individual. So structures like social class or status, other structures like gender structures and so on. And you've got institutions. So you've got the structures of class, age, gender, ethnicity, and our culture. That structures behaviour as well. Obviously status and so on. Institutions like the family, the workplace, religion shape behaviour. So the structuralist theories would include functionalists, Marxists, feminists, and those views are focused on the idea that a behaviour is influenced by the structure of society, which limits and restricts freedoms and determines how we behave. The action approach emphasises human agency, which refers to our ability to make choices and decisions about how we behave, and that is followed by the interactionists. And they argue that we interact in terms of symbols. So the full title of interactionist is symbolic interactionists. And they would say that we are able to make choices about how we perform social roles. So these structures don't limit us alone. We also make choices about how we choose to perform roles within that structure. For example, how we perform the role of fatherhood within the institution of family is partly based on decisions about what type of father we choose to be. The interactionists, but also got the idea of issues like labelling. So, the idea that we're controlled by and influenced by labels that are applied to us. They can be positive labels like a good father, negative labels like a bad mother, a bad son. And so those labels also influence our behaviour based on the interaction between members of society. Part of this is linked to the idea that we're always trying to manage the impression that others have of us, and so our behaviour will change. It's not always following a set routine, because we're going to try and respond. We often respond to the way in which we're labelled. And so those ideas. In the role of the family topic, you can get essay questions on this topic, which could use the wording in the specification. So it says that you need to know about functionalist views on the role of the family and views on the domestic division of labour. So you can talk about instrumental and expressive roles, talk about the functions of socialisation, primary socialisation, stabilisation of adult personalities. That's Parsons, the functionalist. Murdoch is another functionalist, talks about sexual function, economic function, education function, reproductive function. All of those have a purpose for society which keeps society stable, promotes social order and harmony, and keeps society going. The Marxists are part of that section, so you could get a question on Marxists, where you could talk about the evolution of the family as a result of capitalism, monogamy, socialisation, and sexual and other functions viewed in terms of serving the rich, and so exploiting the poor, and so essentially saying society is bad, and it's the structure of society that is a problem. So you can get essays on that. The key differences between those perspectives are important because Marxists focus on conflict and change as a result of capitalism. The functionists emphasise consensus, so shared agreement over values and norms, and they emphasise order, so that tends to emphasise things staying the same or only changing gradually and evolving slowly. Now with those questions, you could get an outline and evaluate functionist views of the role of the family. You could get the same question, that's a 33 marker. If you get the same question with Marxism instead of functionists, you know, those are the two possibilities. Now you could get either of those questions, but what you need to make sure you do is evaluate. So you can evaluate the views by considering the alternatives to those views. So with functionalists, you could refer to functionalists and explain what they say. Then you could talk about Marxist views of what functionists would say, feminist views of what functionists would say. You could use the social action views, you could use the postmodernist views and the new right views of what functionists would say. And in each case, you've got to refer to the question. So if you don't refer back to functionist views, the role of the family, you won't get the full marks. Because if you keep referring in every case to the functionist views of the role of the family, because that's the question, when you mention these other views and refer back to the question, you will get better marks. The way I tend to do it is to use key evaluative words like overplay, or exaggerate, underplay, or ignore, and put those evaluative words into a sentence. If you look at how we can structure a sentence, we can say, for example, Marxists would criticise functionalists. So we show we're evaluating, that's good. And then we can say, you know, Marxists would argue the functionalists overplay. And then we could say something that the functionalists would say. So we could say, Marxists argue functionalists overplay consensus. They underplay, so the Marxists argue the functionists underplay conflict. So I've put a bit of Marxism in the second section of the sentence. Then I could further explain that, but you can see how I've used a bit of Marxism, a bit of functionalism in the sentence. I've used the key words. It makes more sense in this case because I know that conflict and consensus are directly opposed or different. I could also do the same thing with views of socialisation. For example, Marxists argue the functionists overplay consensus and ignore conflict. For example, the functionists emphasise, however, on benefits from socialisation. It's functional to have a nuclear family and children learn values, whereas the Marxists would say that only the rich benefit from socialisation. This leads to exploitation. They'd argue the functionalists overplay benefits for everyone of family life. So you can see how, again, I've used bits of those two different views. I've compared them. First part of the sentence was clear, second part was expanding on it and explaining it a bit with reference back to the question. So that's what you've got to try to do. If you only repeat the information that you know from the other theories, so you just talk about what Marxists say, but all you're doing is really telling the examiner that you know what Marxists say. You're not showing you understand what Marxists say about functionalist views. That's more challenging, but that is what they expect you to do if you want to get high marks. I'm sure that you can do that if you work on it. I'm sure that with focus and attention, you can develop a strategy for every theory and perspective in the way that I've given an example here. So with every question, you've got to refer to a range of perspectives, and you've got to refer to detail, enough explanation. So that is how you get a higher mark, is by looking at breadth, covering enough ground, but also depth, giving adequate detail and explanation of key points. Hope that's been useful. If you've got any questions or queries, contact me, Daniel_Butcher@hotmail.co.uk.